It's my privilege to introduce Josh Bolick, who's the head of the Office of Scholarly Communication and Copyright at KU Libraries. I've known Josh for a very long time since he got here, and he's been, I would say, one of the biggest advocates and champions for open access and opening kind of all of the knowledge that we have, but also, even though you don't know it, he's been one of the strongest advocates at the university with all the publishers that we have a love-hate relationship with. So for example, when we find that we now have the ability to publish for free in lots of journals, a lot of that is from Josh's tireless advocacy and a bunch of negotiation from the libraries about how much we pay them, how much we have to pay them as authors, but also how much our university is paying for. So Josh has really always been my go-to for if I have a contract with a journal or I'm trying to get more involved and make sure that my articles become open access. So I'll let John take it.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah.
And just to acknowledge that there are a bunch of people in the libraries that work on those agreements, and so I don't want to claim like primary responsibility, but I have been a part of them, and that's part of what I want to share with you today. So here's making sure. And I guess I can minimize this. I thought we'd go over just basics of OA. I understand there's a broad range of experience and career status here. So just some sort of like making sure we're all on the same page. We'll talk about the current publication landscape and sort of where OA fits in that. Shifting funder requirements that are particularly hot right now. There's some changes that are coming down the pipeline that if you're getting NSF funding or money from any US federal funder are gonna shape some choices that you're gonna make. Have to make, and so then talk about support available at KU. We'll talk about those open publishing deals, and then just whatever questions or you want to talk about, we can dive into that. So open access refers to scholarly literature that is digital, online, free of charge, and free of most copyright and reuse restrictions. This is the definition of a guy named Peter Suber, who's now retired from Harvard, but he wrote a book about open access. It's called Open Access. It is open access, and was a signature. He signed 2001 or 2 statement called the Budapest Open Access Initiative that sort of was the initial defining what open access is. So this is Peter's definition, and it's sort of a fullest expression of what open access is. But it kind of consists of 2 parts. So the digital, online, and free of charge. A ton of the internet is digital, online, and free of charge. Like I wouldn't necessarily call that open access, but repository-based open access, where you put a copy of your article into KU ScholarWorks or Archive or PubMed Central or NSF PAR or any other kind of disciplinary repository. Those are sometimes still not openly licensed and still protected by all rights reserved copyright status. And that has been nonetheless a major part of the open access movement and how it has been supported for over 20 years now. So this fuller definition, the free of most copyright and reuse restrictions, that's referring to open licenses. So like if you publish an article in a PLOS journal, those come with Creative Commons attribution licenses, which means this is protected by copyright, but anyone is able to reuse it, adapt it, translate it into other languages, reuse the figures, and so on, however they want, so long as they provide attribution. And so that's what that free of most copyright and reuse restrictions is referring to. So there's sort of open as a spectrum, and there's like, I wouldn't say that if you put your article in KU ScholarWorks or in another repository, but it's still protected by all rights reserved copyright, that you're not participating. You are, but this is sort of the most full definition. So you can achieve open access by publishing in open journals or under an open agreement. We'll look at some of those that you have access to, or archiving in an open repository, and we'll also look at that. I should have pointed out, these slides, I didn't study that short link too closely. That's OAKBS 25, not OakBS 25, but do it that way you will. So I'm going to share these with Kirsten. There are links and notes, and these are intended to be a resource themselves. But So there's like, sometimes there are links here. This is a site that we can look at that is researcher facing, sort of like, okay, I want to share my work. Now, what do I do? How do I achieve that? And it's sort of a guiding through that, but that's what this talk is as well. So there are, this is the directory of open access journals. It indexes over 20,000 journals, and I've highlighted there that over 13,000 of them do not charge fees, that there's no cost to publish in those open access journals. I point that out because there's often a conflation with like open costs money. That's not correct. It is the case that it can cost money, but that's not like a universal one-to-one relationship that an open journal automatically costs money. Most of them do not. However, because of the skewing effect of like mega journals like PLOS One or Nature's, is it Scientific Reports, I think, they publish so much open volume that throws off that there is a greater number of articles that are open are supported by article processing charges, but the greater number of open journals are not supported by article processing charges. That's a good tool to look for open publishing opportunities. Predatory sort of journals looms large in these conversations. We used to subscribe to a tool called Cabell's Publishing Directory of Publishing Opportunities. We no longer do, but in any case, lists are problematic of like, these are good journals or these are bad journals. And so the tool that I really like is this one called Think, Check, Submit, which has like checklists that you can use to sort of verify the viability and legitimacy of a publisher, a journal, and that kind of thing. So this is my favorite tool for that purpose, and that is definitely something that you want to be cautious about, especially if you're an early career researcher and navigating this for the first time. Something that seems like too good of an opportunity to be true may be, but we've had researchers who told us that the agreement that we have with Elsevier, where they don't have to pay any fee to choose to publish open, seemed too good to be true, and so they declined that option, like worrying that there was a trick in the that's part of it. So this is a great tool for evaluating publishers and journals to make sure that you're submitting to legitimate ones that are aligned with your goals. There are these open access agreements. So some of these we can pop out and look at. So it's lib.ku.edu OA/agreements. So these are, as it says, open access agreements and APC discounts. Frankly, I'm pretty underwhelmed with APC discounts because they might be a 10 or 25% discount on still a $2,500 charge, and that doesn't move the dial. Nonetheless, they are either offered to us or in some cases we've been able to negotiate for them. If they help you, I think that that's great. What I am what I think is more useful to most researchers is full APC waivers that eliminate the APC for you altogether. Each of these deals is bespoke, so like they can differ, but the main points are they typically apply to the corresponding author. So like the Elsevier agreement requires that in order for an article to be eligible, that the corresponding author be at KU at the point of acceptance. That's when the decision is made. Use your KU email, so that's a way that a lot of publishers identify you with an institution that has the agreement. So like among these that I think are most relevant for you all would be the Company of Biologists, Elsevier, maybe Frontiers, maybe PeerJ, PLOS for sure. Those are all full APC waivers, no cost to KU-based researchers when those conditions are met. That includes graduate students for as long as the life of the agreement. So like we are currently negotiating with Elsevier our next agreement. The existing one was 2023 through 2025. So January 1, the terms of that agreement no longer apply, but we have been able to come to terms with Elsevier in our current negotiations. And until that contract is signed, it's not 100%, but I'm 99% sure that the present terms are continuing. And so there's something like 1,800 journals that KU researchers can publish in at no cost. Unfortunately, not their open access journals. So there's subscription journals and there's their fully open journals. For the open journals, I think it's a 25% discount on the article processing charge. 10%. Okay, yeah. Like I said, I'm not thrilled with that. We tried to negotiate for the open journals to be included in the deal. They didn't go for that. It is, but that's only a few hundred journals, whereas the subscription journals, also known as hybrid journals, because you can pay an article processing charge to make an individual article open in an otherwise closed context. This is what like that eliminates the article processing charges in those. So the vast majority of Elsevier's titles. So those are ones that are like APC completely waived so long as conditions are met. So, but like, there's these, you know, you need to be the corresponding author. They need to be able to associate you with the institution. And it needs to be accepted during the life of the agreement. So I'm confident that we're going to have a similar agreement on the other side of December, but prior to that level of confidence, because of how the negotiations were going, the situation was like, if your article was accepted after Christmas, but before January 1st, it would have been eligible. But if it were accepted after January 1st, it would not have been. But we're expecting that the terms of that will agree. So anyway, it's worth paying attention to like the time period. And if in doubt, you could reach out and ask if those negotiations are pending or what the status of them is. So that's what those agreements are. And when we get to the Q&A and discussion, we can dive into any of the details with those. Kirsten asked me if I could talk a little bit about the advantage, like, okay, like why do you want your work to be open? And there's like two general, I think, arguments that function there. One of them is that there's been a pretty sustained body of research with some mixed results. But this is an article from Science from, I think it was January of 2024, pretty recently, citing a new publication in Scientometrics. Open access papers draw more citations from a broader readership. So it's called the open access citation advantage. And this is a quote from it. Open papers attract more total citations, and those citations come from scholars in a wider range of locations, institutions, and fields of research. And the study also reports a citation diversity advantage for, they're saying green open access or repository-based open access is controversial. I don't agree with that framing, but there's a citation diversity advantage for repository-based OA. And so the point is, it benefits you as researchers to have your work be open access because it's more likely to be read and cited, and there's data that supports that. The other argument, and forgive me for the how much text is on this slide. I've included all that here more for the resource and as a stand-in. That this is our Open Access Week keynoted it. So Open Access Week is an international opportunity to highlight the benefits and sort of advocate for open access. This is Tuesday, October 21st at 11 in Watson Library. 3 West is the event space that when you walk in is over to the right. Mike Doherty is the chair of psychology at the University of Maryland, and he worked with his faculty to say, like, okay, if there are faculty who don't feel that they can participate in making their works open or publishing in open journals because of promotion and tenure or evaluation, let's work together to adjust our promotion and tenure and evaluation criteria so that those practices are supported and recognized. So this keynote is open to everyone. This is what that bolded section, he envisions a tight coupling between faculty evaluation and institutional values, focusing on incentivizing openness, transparency, public access, community engagement, research integrity, and practices that promote a more trustworthy and inclusive science, which are things that I think most researchers agree would be generally good things. So that keynote, anyone is welcome to attend. There's a workshop that follows that there's room for about 40 people in. So in the afternoon, we're asking people to register for this one. This is more applied. So any researcher who's like interested in sort of the application of those ideas to sort of like dig in more and see what they look like would be welcome to register for that. And then there's a biography for him here. So those are kind of stand in to say like the argument is that open access serves the public good by providing open access to more works that our doctors and policymakers and all the people that we are trained to read the literature have access to it, but because we all benefit from that. But also there are folks who maybe have a medical situation in their family who want to access the literature and so on. But then it serves things like rigor and transparency and these kinds of things as well. So like, I guess this is a good point to sort of pause for a second and say like, any basic questions about open access? Hearing none.
So I guess for the early career researchers, like where will they first encounter this decision where OA becomes important? I guess maybe even when they're just researching.
Yeah, so you could be, as researchers, encountering open literature in your lit reviews and things like that, or like not encountering it, but you're encountering paywalls and getting frustrated with how to access literature that isn't open. If like it could be a decision about like where you're submitting your research. So whether that's PLOS or PeerJ, like an open context that would be supported and recognized, or in a more traditional context, and then would one of these agreements be in place to help? We like just this week have had requests for a similar deal with the American Chemical Society, and I'm not sure that we're going to be able to get there because the last time we negotiated with them, we couldn't afford it. So like, that's what I was going to get to next is sort of like context in which we like these negotiations take place. But even if you're publishing in a subscription context, the vast majority of journals permit some form of sharing. So like often it's the author's accepted manuscript. Maybe 6 months after publication, maybe 12 months after publication, can be longer, but there's generally some opportunity to share in the vast majority of circumstances, like in a repository. So like maybe bioRxiv would be like a disciplinary repository for you guys. So it might be that you could put your accepted manuscript benefiting from the peer review process and all of the changes that resulted from that into bioRxiv 12 months from publication, something like that. Okay, so if the state of publishing, like Ben mentioned, like these publishers that we sort of love and hate, if you're curious how scholarly publishing comes to be the complex landscape that it is, this is a great article from The Guardian. It's from 2017, so a little long in the tooth, but it looks at the career of one person. His name was Robert Maxwell, who saw an opportunity to manipulate a market and become a millionaire, essentially. And so he, in the 50s and 60s, started working with scholarly societies and with researchers to offer them not that much money, but researchers were so thrilled to have a little bit of money thrown at them and started taking ownership of those journals to professionalize them, but in the process, increasing the cost of subscriptions and creating a lot of new journals as well. And so he worked at a press called Pergamum. Their model was acquire and create new journals. They were acquired by Elsevier in 1991, I think, and Elsevier's model has increased the price. And when you put those two models together, they're so incredibly competitive, like in the marketplace, that all of the peers have to sort of play ball that way or not be able to compete. And so that puts a ton of pressure on this system. Yeah, this is a great read on sort of how that came to be. A few slides here that are about how much scholarship has grown. So this is STEM is the like industry organization for scholarly publishing. They estimate, so this is the industry itself estimates that the market value annually is somewhere around $29 billion a year. So scholarly publishing is big money, and it is because we give them our product, like we do the research, we do the peer review, we sit on the editorial boards and so on, and then we give it to them for free because the market has been so heavily manipulated into this sort of, I would argue, extractive and exploitative model that it is. This is the number of journals that are indexed in Scopus by year from 1900 to 2020. And so you see this post-war period where it just ratchets up in an exponential way. So the volume of literature has grown exponentially. And along the way, like in a resource-rich environment in the years after World War II for a few decades, there's so much money being pumped into the research infrastructure, including universities and libraries, that we could continue subscribing to all of those new journals, but there's a point at which that's no longer possible. And so at this point, the richest institutions in the world can't afford access to all of the scholarly literature. In fact, MIT and Harvard and like Duke have been really important advocates for open access.
What happened in the 80s that led to a decline?
Good question. I was about 2 at the start of the 80s. But yeah, that's a good question. I mean, does anyone who was like maybe remembers the 80s better, like politically, have a? I mean, that's the Reagan years, so maybe there was a reduction in support for
Last backlash.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. This one is science and engineering articles in all fields for the 15 largest producing regions from 2008 to 2018, and every single one of them grows. So across the world, the number of articles in these fields grows from about 1.75 million to about 2.5 million per. So those are, yeah. Anyway, it grows exponentially. It grows in every region except for Japan, decreases slightly, and is it France, but just by the dozens, doesn't increase. But in every other region, so there's just, again, explosion. No matter what time period you look at since World War II, the volume of literature and journals has been increasing. And so you have this situation where institutions are having to drop agreements with major publishers. From 2000 to 2010 or so, a lot of institutions were looking critically at all the things that we subscribe to and cutting the lowest use, the smallest things, like small agreements, single journals, that kind of thing. Around 2010 and to 2015, that started to shift, where a growing number of institutions were having to cut big deals. Well, that's actually what we call these large journal packages. That's the industry term, is big deal. Generally a comprehensive agreement that covers access to all of a publisher's content. And so SPARC, which is the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, DC-based nonprofit that advocates for open access, open data, and open education, has this big deal cancellation tracking database that includes KU, as well as lots of our peers. Like basically everywhere has had to cancel agreements. This is a story about an institution in the UK dropping their agreement with Elsevier in January of this year. So this is a global problem, and from the richest institutions to the poorest, there are access issues. This is a study by a nonprofit called Ithaca SR. They're a library-facing nonprofit called What's the Big Deal? How researchers are navigating changes to journal access. We participated in this study in KU libraries. So essentially this sort of like question of like, if we are losing access, how are we continuing to support you and the access that you need so that you continue to succeed and do your work? There's who's heard of Sci-Hub? I'm not the copyright police, so like it's okay. Who's used Sci-Hub? Some hands. So this is scholarly literature piracy. And from my perspective, this is a symptom of the access problem. It is illegal. My understanding is that the founder has agreed to participate in a lawsuit in India because there's hope of a precedent that serves her. I don't know where that will go, but in order to proceed with that lawsuit, she agreed to stop adding new content to Sci-Hub. At one point, I understood that something like 95% of everything Elsevier and the American Chemical Society had ever published was available in Sci-Hub. It's also like it's simple to, I'm not advocating for its use. When we cancel an agreement, I can't say like, hey, we're like, you no longer have access to these hundreds of titles, but no worries, just go download them from Sci-Hub. That would be contributory infringement and not responsible. But my wife, when she was applying for a job here, had published an article in a Duke University press journal and needed to provide it to the search committee and was like, oh no, I don't have it on my computer and I don't have access to it. Josh, does KU have access to it? And we did not. But for fun, Sci-Hub in 2015 was like really in the discussion prominently, had been covered by Science Magazine and things like that. And so I was like, I'll see if it's available in Sci-Hub, and all you need is a DOI. Whereas to log into KU library systems means like you got to have your online ID and navigate all of that. But it delivered the article in less than a second. And so I think that 2015 expose in Science found that there's the expectation that this is being heavily used in, say, like developing economies, but in reality, it's being used everywhere, including in rich university towns in the US. So governance at KU has been pretty supportive. The first action with that really was the 2009 faculty open access policy, which continues to be on the books, and we could talk about. But even as recently as the last time we were negotiating for our Elsevier agreement, both the University Senate and the Faculty Senate passed resolutions that acknowledged that this is a complex environment, that we were doing the best we can in service to you all, and there was like solidarity there. And that's part of what I think brought Elsevier to the table, more willing to negotiate terms that were favorable. They were aware of this. KU ScholarWorks is the KU institutional repository. There are, I think it's 39,000 objects presently in KU ScholarWorks, something like that. Theses and dissertations, for those of you who are grad students, publications, teaching material, posters would be a great thing. Like so often you go to a conference, you present your poster, the poster goes in the trash. You could put it in ScholarWorks. One of my most cited things is a poster. And so like that gives it a life beyond the initial presentation. So there are resources to support both open publishing, if that's the avenue you want to go. But if you aren't taking advantage of an open publishing agreement or able to pay an article processing charge, there are other ways to achieve openness, including archiving your work in KU ScholarWorks. And we do a mediated deposit process. So like you don't have to navigate some new system that's not familiar. You send an email that says, hey, I want to put my article in ScholarWorks. Here's the manuscript. Here's a citation. We pretty much take it from there. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is the ways that funders, US federal funders, are changing. So for NSF, which I suspect is the most normal funder that you all would be applying to, the policy that's been on the books since 2015 is that if you take NSF money, you must deposit or your publisher, the accepted manuscript or better version of record must be in NSF PAR within 12 months from the data publication. In August 2022, the Office of Science and Technology Policy issued a new memorandum called Ensuring Free, Immediate, and Equitable Access to Federally Funded Research that said that by January 1st, 2026, every US federal funding agency must have a public access plan in place and that embargoes are not allowed. And so they've been developing those plans. They also apply to data. So some expectations about not only the publication must be available from the data publication, but also the data that supports it. That is presenting some challenges. So like the NSF's new policy is, I don't have an implementation date for that yet. We're supposed to learn when that is sometime in the next month or two. But all of the funders are supposed to have their plans in place by December 31st or January 1st. Hopefully I'm not gonna run out of battery. What we do know though is that NIH, their policy was set to go into effect on October 1st, but in April, the new head of NIH said, we're gonna ramp up implementation to July 1st. And so as of July 1st, any article that's NIH funded accepted on or after July 1st is required to be immediately publicly accessible per the requirements of the new policy. And that is putting some people in a bind because publishers, some like for Sage journals, that's one of the big 5 commercial publishers. Sage doesn't have any problem with immediate public access to the accepted manuscript. That's been their policy for years. But Wiley is saying, due to NIH's requirements, for funded articles in any of Wiley's open access journals, they will continue to deposit to PubMed Central on your behalf. But for deposit, or if they're accepted into hybrid journals, the only route to compliance is the payment of an article processing charge or being at an institution that has an agreement that would waive that charge. KU is not an institution that has an agreement with Wiley. So that's challenging. There's also, Springer Nature takes a similar stance. They're saying that if you are NIH funded and subject to that new immediate public access requirement, publishing via the subscription route is not viable. Publication under the subscription model isn't suitable for authors whose funders require no embargo. So some publishers are digging in and their position is pay or you may not be compliant with your funder requirement. There was an article in the Chronicle not quite a month ago about how researchers are being caught in this bind. And last week I heard from a colleague at the Med Center who's heard from 2 researchers who have been caught in this, where their funder is saying you must make the work publicly accessible. The journal is saying you cannot unless you pay this fee. I've been communicating with the KUCR, KU Research, and the Office of Faculty Affairs about like what I could tell someone who is in that bind right now is to either find a way to pay the APC, which isn't a great answer, or withdraw your article, which also isn't a great answer. And I want better things to be able to tell you. So that's not, I mean, is anyone here funded by or regularly applies to NIH? So not in your group. So like you don't have to immediately worry about this, except that NIH's policy is the result of the same directive that NSF's developing. So I would expect to be in this situation as of January 1st, if not sooner. And so what we are presently advocating for is being aware. If you're applying for funding, know what you're signing up for and be prepared to fulfill those grant obligations. That may have an impact on where you choose to submit your scholarship to. So like where we have an agreement with Elsevier, that presents a means of complying that doesn't cost you money and that doesn't put you in that pinch. But with Wiley and Springer Nature, we don't have those agreements. And so you could budget for them, but in the grant, but you publish beyond the life of the grant, and so that's not a perfect resolution, and the agreements end or may not be renewed. You know, like those are also not a perfect situation. So this is going to be a thing that we navigate together over the course of the next few years. And there's a tension right now between funders and publishers. And unfortunately, researchers are being caught in the middle of that. And I'm doing what I can. So OFA has been really responsive and is including some information and a link to this resource that is a library guide about these funder public access policies, making recommendations for how to anticipate and comply. They're including this in their October newsletter. KUCR is also including it in their October newsletter. And we're talking about a jointly hosted webinar that will occur in the early spring between the libraries, KUCR, and OFA to prepare researchers to navigate this. As far as I know, there isn't an institutional fund to pay article processing charges if there's not a deal or you're not budgeted for it in your grant. So this is going to be challenging. So that is the information that I wanted to present to you, and I'm happy to talk about any of it or anything related to it. And if I don't know the answer to a question, I will own that. And we can talk about whatever's interesting to you for the time left. And Kirsten, I think maybe wanted me to initially start to say, if you've got someplace to be, please go. I will not be offended if you get up and go. But this is the last thing I have today. So if I need to stick around and talk a little longer, I am fine with doing that. What's interesting to you all?
I'm curious if compliance, talk about the last issue, if compliance is monitored strictly by the funding agency, or if there's compliance that's being monitored by the institution, and where does that actually happen?
So what they're saying is that it's a condition for future funding. That would be like the check. Like, I don't think a human will be looking at publication dates and going, ooh, you're out of compliance at the funder level. But when you're providing reports about publications to date, interim, or an end of grant report, or you're applying for future funding, that could be a thing that they're verifying compliance with at that point. KU's prerogative to ensure compliance, like we talk about our grants, and in a sense they are, but technically they're KU's grants. And what NIH is saying is that a failure to comply can be a threat to all institutional funding for, like, across the board. And so how seriously they intend to impose that, I don't know. What my understanding is that something like 85 or 90% of all KU funded research is funded by NIH, NSF, or the Department of Education. Department of Education is a mess. Like, the current administration has directed it to disassemble itself to the extent permitted by law. And like the funding wing of the Department of Education, where the public access policy is sort of based, it's like Department of Ed is just like in chaos. So I don't have an implementation date for the Department of Education. And I don't know what to tell Department of Education funded researchers about when they are supposed to be compliant, or like when we will know that. That's another thing I've been talking to admin about, is like, what do we do? Like, what do they do? And I mean, what it currently is on that guide, which has dedicated tabs for NIH, NSF, and the Department of Education, is to go ahead and assume that the NIH rules will roughly apply, and be prepared to do that, even if your funder isn't presently saying, because at some point they could come back and say, oh, you're out of compliance. And that was on the books, and I don't know. I know the Department of Energy is approaching it, I believe, as like a 1 year sort of transition period of where I think that, I'm not sure that this is their public hard stance, but they're roughly saying, like, what my understanding is they're saying, we understand that this is a challenge and there's going to be a period where we're not maybe leveraging like that power, wielding that power too severely, but get ready.
So do you know where DOD comes down? Are they likely to be in that boat too, the Department of Defense?
They're
Department of War?
yeah, they are they're impacted by the directive, and off the top of my head, there is on this site, there's a couple of resources linked here by this organization. Spark is really important in my world, and they are paying close attention to this. So agencies without updated policies published include the DoD. So at present, we don't know anything about that. But I would expect something to be coming down the pipeline. I mean, there's all of the policies that I've seen, either drafts or final versions of, recognize that there are some circumstances under which public access isn't appropriate. And so like, there's usually a little bit of flexibility, like they're not going to disclose national security kinds of data or, personally identifiable data and things like that. So there's some flexibility. That the verbiage that circulates in my world is as open as possible, as closed as necessary. Yeah, yes.
It's just like I just did my grant for the USDA literally 7 days ago.
Mhm.
And when I got to the publication section, they had a new part that was like, I certify under oath that my publications have been uploaded to the USDA Open Access Repository Pub Act, which I'd never heard of and never got a notification that we had to do that. So like, I did it, because all my stuff is open access.
Right.
But I think even though the USDA, for instance, is not publishing their guidelines, they're
starting to get,
they are
yeah.
starting to implement checks to make sure that you are
Yeah.
following.
Yeah. I mean, that circles back to the question you asked about like who, so like, I know that post-award people in KUCR help researchers comply with like lots of compliance requirements, right? And then this is just being added to the list.
So actually, I had a question.
Sure.
Uploading your work to one of those repositories, like all of mine is published with open access, so I don't feel bad uploading the like fully formatted manuscript. But when I was talking with other researchers, most of them European, the way that they complied to take the accepted unformatted version, and then they upload it onto ResearchGate or whatever open access version they want. According to them, the legality is such that the publisher owns the formatted version, but the idea and the writing is yours. And so they've been using that as a workaround. And I remember hearing that and being like, oh, that's interesting, but also a little terrifying. I don't want to do that because I'm not sure if that's technically legal in the state.
Yeah, I mean, so like most publication agreements, so by the way the copyright law, I'm not a lawyer, nothing I say can or should be construed as legal advice, but the way that the copyright works is that when you fix your idea in a tangible form of expression, that's the moment that it's protected by copyright. And unless there's like a work for hire situation, or then the copyright is yours. KU's intellectual property policy further recognizes that and says, your scholarship is yours. We don't claim ownership of that. If you create a company, we own 51% of that or whatever it is. But your scholar, that's why we can sign those agreements, is that we own the rights in them. But what a lot of those agreements say is that a complete transfer of rights. So like they own all of it. But what has been happening for a long time is they've been in a section further below say rights retained by the author. And that could be like including a version in your thesis or dissertation, presenting it at conferences, using it in downstream works, like whatever they may be. And frequently what's there is the ability to share the accepted manuscript on a personal website, departmental, institutional website, an open repository. I skipped past a slide that has this tool on it called Sherpa Romeo. It's been rebranded as the Open Policy Finder. So this is a UK-based tool, but pretty helpful. So I'll do science. So this is the journal Science. Oh, there we go. Science. They are saying you can share the accepted manuscript with no embargo on your author's homepage or institutional site. There's some conditions. There are different funder prerequisites, some of these. So these look mostly like EU. So I'm surprised that your European collaborators are taking that approach, because in the EU, if they have funding from like Wellcome Trust or any of the funders that are participating in something called Coalition S, the S is alleged to stand for shock, where when they released Plan S in 2018, that was intended to shock the scholarly publishing system. They're required not like, so the US approach is take our money, but put the resulting scholarship in this repository. The EU approach, if they're funded by any of that coalition of funders, is you must publish in open journals that have a Creative Commons attribution requirement. I think they walked back from that a little bit and sort of permitted more repository-based sharing, but they were generally a little more like stringent, and have since recognized the problems that sets up, because it codifies APC's article processing charges in a global research system where not everyone has access to pay those. I mean, I think that Nature made a big stink a couple years ago when they announced that their new article processing charge is over $11,000. And I think now it might be up to like 14, which is crazy. Most PLOS journals are like between 2,500 and 4,000. When article processing charges were proposed as a solution in 2002, they were sort of like, hey, like, okay, if we're taking away subscription revenue, how are the real costs of publishing being covered? No one seriously believes that there's like free publishing, that it doesn't cost anything. PLOS and Biomed Central, BMC, I think that's right. Both sort of said, well, researchers are getting grants, maybe some processing fees could be covered by the grants, because there's this experimentation mode. Like, how do we cover those costs? And so that was proposed as an idea. And in retrospect, it hasn't worked out great for a variety of reasons. But that's what sets up the predatory sort of opportunities, scams that are based on this, especially where there's a like publish or perish, the pressure to publish is high. But also like, so there was a recent call from the NIH to say, let's talk about capping article processing charges that are payable by our grants. Here's 5 ways that we're thinking about doing that. Give us feedback on these ideas. That deadline for submitting comment to that closed on Monday. And a lot of people said, wait, if you cap the article processing charge, you set a floor that everyone can then charge up to that. So even journals that are currently charging, say, $1,200, if it's $4,000, are justified in raising their article processing charge to that floor of $4,000. And so a ton of comments were submitted, and we will see where that goes. But I would expect, if that is implemented at NIH, that the other major federal funders would be looking at that as a possible precedent. It is a really complex time in this landscape, and it's gonna be that way for a little bit.
Yeah, I just add that, I mean, you can see how knowledgeable Josh is about the complexity of it. And if you're super intimidated, I was too, like, especially as you're trying to navigate this stuff. And especially, I think, if you believe in open access or now are required to do that. But the library has been nothing but beneficial in terms of like, you get a journal accepted, you get an article accepted, and you're really celebratory, right? And then you immediately get like this document. They're fantastic at helping you navigate, for example, putting it in the repository very easily. You just send them the thing that just got accepted, and now it's in a repository and it's green open access. But they can also help you in navigating the documents that you're signing.
Yeah, that's a lot of it. It was just like, I would sit down with you, or we could get on a call or whatever and say, this is what your agreement says.
Yeah.
About your ownership or not of your work and the rights that you retain. And I'm not coming at that like, and at like in a bully sort of like, and make your work open. Like, my approach to that is like, you're signing this document, it legally controls what you can do with what was your work. And you should be in a position to advocate for yourself and exercise those rights according to your own goals. How you proceed from there is up to you. But I at least want you to know what your contracts mean, and that's like something that I do fairly regularly.